think that if that does not happen, we're in for another 2 years of election denialism, audits, recounts, lawsuits, you name it. And the 2022 election is never going to end, just like the 2020 election never ended here.
The state of Arizona, ground zero for election challenges, now features two midterm nail-biters that will not only impact control in Washington, D.C., but may actually mint a new path to winning based on one candidate's willingness to take the gloves off. Here from Ballard Studios, it's 13th and Park.
The future doesn't belong to the faint hearted.
There is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America.
We will make America strong again.
We will get through this together.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
Hank Stephenson is the award-winning reporter whose work has been featured in the Arizona Capital Times, the Daily Star, Politico, and the New York Times. More recently, he co-founded the Arizona Agenda, which is a must-read in Arizona government and politics. Hank, welcome to 13th and Park.
Thanks for having me on.
There's so much to cover. Justin, take it away.
First, I want to talk to you about the governor's race that many of us around the country are watching. The latest Fox 10 poll has Kari Lake leading Secretary of State Katie Hobbs by 11 points, and what many thought would be a very close election, 50-50. Has anything happened recently that helps explain this polling lead that Kari Lake seems to have taken in the final weeks of this campaign?
Look, we're seeing nationally Republicans are surging at this late stage in the election season. So I think there's a lot of just national vibe going into this. I also think that 11-point poll is certainly an outlier. I think the race will still be a lot closer than that. I chalk that up to the unreliability of polling more than any real factor that is hit in the last 2 weeks that would have given her an 11-point bump.
Do you think, though, that the refusal to debate, that we're talking about Katie Hobbs, the Secretary of State, has that been a factor perhaps in Katie Hobbs in this situation not maybe ascending faster in this race?
Certainly. I think that has dragged on for weeks. We've been talking about the great debate here in Arizona, and it has not played well for Katie Hobbs. I know a lot of Democrats who are really frustrated with her refusal to debate. I think that for people who have not made up their mind yet, with only less than 2 weeks left of early voting to go before election day, that could be a deciding factor. You know, they want somebody who is willing to stand up and say what they stand for, what they're going to do, who can kind of go through that battle test of a debate on the campaign trail and prove that they're ready for the job. And Katie Hobbs, their team made a calculated decision that not debating would be less of a detriment to the campaign than actually going up there and debating. But I don't think they foresaw this debate over debates going on for months like it has. It's really dragged on. And Kari Lake has used it well. I mean, she held a press conference at the local PBS, which was supposed to host the debate. It also hosts the ASU Walter Cronkite School of Journalism there. She went out on the steps. Every journalism student in that school was out there. The entire press corps, that covers politics regularly was out there. She has seized this moment really, really well and used it to her advantage. And I think that Katie Hobbs really underestimated the potential cost of not showing up for a debate.
That's fascinating. And I think it's one of the things it shows is Kari Lake's journalistic background. She really has a keen understanding of how to drive a storyline and drive a narrative relentlessly, which I think seems like that's what she's done with this whole debate thing, which I guess is what the Hobbs campaign didn't accurately foresee.
Yeah, 100%. Kari Lake is an excellent campaigner. I mean, she looks great in front of a camera. She is smooth. She is calculated. She is put together. I think Democrats were really excited when she won the nomination
Right.
because they thought she would be the easiest person to beat because she is very far right. The other candidate in the primary was a much more moderate Republican, kind of in line with Governor Ducey, who has had no problem winning general elections in Arizona. And I still think that had the other candidate won in the primary, we probably wouldn't be talking about what a close race this is, because she was more in the mold of Doug Ducey, those kind of statewide moderate Republicans who have done really well here. Carrie Lake is great on the campaign trail, but starts with the disadvantage of being essentially, and she loves this saying, Trump in a dress. She repeats that all the time. And Trump lost here in 2020, despite what Trump will tell you. So, there's a lot of factors going into this, but it's been a long election season, I'll tell you.
She also, as you know, Hank, has been talking about one of her heroes in political history, Ronald Reagan. So, in a way, is Carrie Lake getting the benefit of both the kind of the currency of Donald Trump and the legacy and legend of Ronald Reagan?
Well, here in Arizona, we look to John McCain. If we're talking legacy and legend of somebody of that stature, it's kind of the John McCain camp versus the MAGA camp. She has made some inroads with the business community. I've heard from a lot of kind of Republicans who have spoken to people in the business community who have had meetings with her, sit downs where the feeling when they walk out of those things is, wow, she's nothing like, what she looks like, what she acts like on TV. She seems put together. She seems intelligent. She does not seem unhinged. So she's making real inroads with the business community. But I think a lot of the old Republican chattering class, the McCainites, the political consultants, the, people about town in Republican circles are still very hesitant to support somebody like Carrie Lake. I mean, she is dancing on the grave of John McCain's legacy. She has taken swipes at Governor Doug Ducey. I think that's really hurt her among the Republican establishment, for lack of a better word. But if she can bridge that kind of MAGA divide with the Republican moderates, establishment, business community, then she's got a real path forward. She can win this election. I think that right now it's looking like she's the odds-on favorite, although not by 11 points.
Good evening, Lester. Right now, they are counting those ballots inside that building over there, but out in front, there is a protest that is growing with people angry, saying that they think that this election is being stolen from the president, even though there has been no evidence of that. And Maricopa County poll workers say they will continue to count those votes despite protests, and they're hoping to have results by the weekend.
What impact has the post-2020 presidential audits and skepticism about the voting results, has that had any impact on this year's race? And what likelihood is there that the same type of scenario could play itself out after the November 2022 elections?
We have been in election denial lands since November 2020. It has been a nonstop kind of circus here in Arizona, with the cyber ninjas conducting their hand count audit, searching through the ballots for bamboo fibers, black lights all over them. But that has not stopped, local Republicans from continuing to push the narrative that the 2020 election was stolen. And I really think that the 2022 election in Arizona is kind of a referendum on that question. Do you believe that the 2020 election was won by Joe Biden fair and square? The Republicans up and down our ballots, it's statewide ballot, do not believe that. And they've said so very, very clearly. The Democrats have. So it's been, a huge theme in this campaign. It will be an even bigger theme in 2024, I have a feeling. And I don't know how we get out of this kind of cycle that Arizona has landed in, unless, weirdly enough, Carrie Lake wins and Republicans sweep statewide offices. I think that if that does not happen, we're in for another 2 years of election denialism, audits, recounts, lawsuits, you name it. And the 2022 election is never going to end, just like the 2020 election never ended here.
It looks like Blake Masters who apparently on some scorecards was all but written off a month or two ago, has made a comeback. Where does that race stand today? And more specifically, how does Mark Victor, who's a Libertarian candidate, the third candidate on the ballot, how does he play into winners and losers in that U.S. Senate Derby? And could it be in a state where Libertarians are the better part of, I think, 1% of the electorate? How could that maybe determine who not only carries that race, but ultimately who controls the U.S. Senate?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Mark Kelly's allies had largely downplayed the threat that Blake Masters posed to him. Mark Kelly is an amazing fundraiser. He's got tons of money to run this race. And he's been relatively non-controversial in his short term in office. And I think that a lot of Democrats had kind of written that off up until a month or so ago, when it became apparent that this race was not going to be, the national winds had not quite shifted as much as Democrats had hoped after the abortion ruling. And frankly, when the Republicans kind of worked out their inner party fight over whose candidate Blake Masters was. Is he, a Mitch McConnell candidate who's Mitch McConnell's responsibility to prop up with funding, or is he a Peter Thiel candidate? And is it on Peter Thiel to pay for him? So now that the money has been flowing a little bit better into Blake Masters' campaign, he also had an excellent showing at a debate against Mark Kelly. I think he really stood his ground there and did a good job of coming off like a human who was competent and not a stiff politician. He's been searching. Now that it's still a very tight race. I think that the fact that he's within the margin of error shows that he's had a good month or two, but whether he can pull this off, like you said, we have a libertarian on the ballot this year for the U.S. Senate race, and they can be spoilers. I mean, if 1% of the vote bleeds off to a libertarian candidate, that's 1% of the vote that probably would have gone to Blake Masters had the libertarian not been there. And this is a race that'll probably be decided by 1% of the vote. That's why Republicans in the past have worked so hard to keep third parties off of our ballots. They've made it very, very hard for libertarians to qualify for the ballot in Arizona because they know there is this spoiler effect. When you've got a Republican and a libertarian, a certain amount bleeds off into the libertarian that otherwise would have gone to the Republican, and it has cost them races in the past.
What's going on in Arizona? Why has Arizona, at least in my view, gone from being a relatively reliable Republican state to a true toss-up state?
I mean, a host of factors. One, we have a huge influx of people moving to Arizona from all across the United States. A lot of them are coming from California. We've got kind of a booming tech sector that is courting those California businesses, trying to get them to move to Arizona, and with them come California employees. So I think they've, to some degree, kind of shifted the makeup of the state. It would also certainly be you have to consider the Latino vote in Arizona, which has been growing stronger and stronger over the years. After kind of the early 2010s, the Tea Party wave, and our deep dive into anti-immigrant sentiments here in Arizona, the Latino advocacy groups grew very powerful. They figured out how to organize, how to win. And they have machines that are well tuned and doing a lot of work to get out the vote here among Latinos who previously did not vote. That is also a group that is aging into voting. Our Latino population is largely young, and as they grow older, they grow more likely to vote. So that's part of the factor. And I think also we've seen, a lot of these cases when a Democrat has won a statewide office, they've done so by playing to the middle, where the Republican Party is not doing that. So by playing to, presenting yourself as an independent, as a thoughtful leader who is not beholden to either political party in Washington, is always a pretty popular message. And Democrats have harnessed that pretty well in past years. Look at Kirsten Sinema. She, is hardly a Democrat these days, and certainly did not campaign on being a progressive Democrat like she once was.
I looked at the Secretary of State website this morning, saw the current registration numbers in Arizona, basically 34.5% Republican, 33.5% independent, and about a little over 31% Democrat. In other words, the independents are number two. What is it about the independents in Arizona that maybe make them a little bit different than other independents? Because if you look at 2008, they supported President Obama. In 2016, they supported President Trump. In 2020, they supported Joe Biden. So where are they moving right now, especially if there is the beginning of a red wave as we head toward November 8th?
Yeah, that's always kind of hard to gauge whether, our independents are partisans who have dropped their party labels and are always going to vote whatever side of the aisle they would have voted had they, kept their party labels, or whether they're true swing voters. And I think certainly the answer is somewhere in between those two things. There are a lot of people who are up for grabs in any given election who don't feel very strongly aligned with either party. And in Arizona, we make it super easy to register as an independent and yet still participate. You can't vote in the presidential preference primary here as an independent. You have to kind of line up with one of the parties. And every 4 years, we kind of see a shift of independents re-registering as a Republican or a Democrat so that they can vote in that. But otherwise, you can vote in either party's primary as an independent. I've always been an independent, and I go and poll whatever primary ballot is hotter in August. So I think that's a big factor to why Arizona has more independents than a lot of other states. We just make it real easy. But also, Arizona's always kind of had an independent spirit. And I think a lot of people just kind of pride themselves on saying, I'm a political independent, even if, they're traditionally voting with one party or another.
I was in Phoenix, Arizona this weekend. I saw a lot of ads on the issue of immigration.
Sure.
What impact is the immigration issue going to have on both the governor's race and the Senate race, if any?
Top three issue, always. I think this year it is probably a top two issue because of kind of the surge of people coming to the border that we've seen in the last year or so. Republicans are really hammering this hard. They want this to be the top one issue because it plays to their favor. Republicans have always kind of stood tough on the border. And I think that even a lot of kind of moderate Democrats in Arizona, independents in Arizona, believe that we should have a strong but humane border policy. I think that is a very middle of the road opinion in Arizona that we do need to secure our borders. We have a border on our southern, at the southern tip of the state that is a pathway for criminals, for drugs to come into the state. And while it's not what a lot of politicians or media will make it seem like it is an issue that needs to be addressed in Arizona one way or another. And even our Democrats here, they've got to make a trip to the border. You mentioned the border ads, Adam, but they are a classic trope here in Arizona. You need your cowboy hat, you need your boots, some kind of jeans, maybe a belt buckle, a nice rodeo buckle, some plaid going, and you have to walk the border with a sheriff or another, or you are not getting elected to statewide office in Arizona.
Hey, Hank, don't ever underestimate the power of props in political advertising. I mean, they are huge. Never.
If Kelly loses and Hobbs loses, or either one of them loses, what would be the reason why they were going to lose? And what does that say about the state of Arizona's voters moving forward to 2024?
Yeah, I'll grant you Kelly was seen as the favorite. I don't know that Hobbs was ever necessarily seen as the favorite, or if she was, it was, a slight edge. She may be running ahead. It was not the kind of slam dunk vibe that the Kelly campaign was giving off.
But I guess going back to that is that the Democrats wanted Lake to be the nominee. Didn't they think that she was more beatable than the alternative candidate in a Republican primary, or not?
Yeah, yes, they certainly did think she was the more beatable of the two. I don't think that was a miscalculation necessarily. I think she probably is the more beatable of the two.
If she wins, what would be the takeaway if she were to win? What should those of us around the country watching Arizona politics, what should we take away from that?
We're still a magenta shade of purple, I guess. This when we say that she's a beatable candidate, the default is that the Republican will win in Arizona. So a Democrat has to outraise, has to outwork, has to outmaneuver a generic Republican on the ballot to win here. It is still a red purple. So what can we take away from it? I mean, a lot of this is national wins. I think that before the Dobbs ruling came down, there was a strong GOP advantage in Arizona. After the Dobbs ruling, a lot of Democrats kind of got some wind underneath their wings and started feeling really good about it. But this is, a Republican year, most likely. We've got a Democratic president, Democratic Senate, Democratic House. There's always a backlash in off-year elections like this. So, Arizona is still a battleground state, and I think it will continue to become more and more of a battleground state. But it's a battleground for Republicans to defend and Democrats to, be the challengers here.
Hey, Hank, recently, Kari Lake, when it was reported that the NFL may be considering moving the Super Bowl from Arizona, should Kari Lake be elected governor of the state, and her response was basically, I don't represent the NFL, don't really care about the NFL. I represent the people of Arizona. Is that part of her brand, that she is a more, at times, pugilistic performer who believes what she believes and she makes no apologies for it?
That is 100% her brand. I think that there was, I'm not sure how much this has kind of gotten broken through the noise of, early voting election season with the voters. But I think she even said something to the effect of like, the NFL won't do anything that stupid. She is not afraid to punch people in the face.
Right.
But we have a history of the Super Bowl being a political issue here in Arizona. We did not have a Martin Luther King Day.
Yep.
That was an issue for the NFL at one point, and we lost the Super Bowl because of it. And after that, we got a Martin Luther King Day.
Hank, good luck in moving forward in trying to not only report on, but decipher what you're seeing and hearing as you move into and through the next round of elections.
Not only is Katie Hobbs refusing to do a single debate.
Why no debates this go around?
You don't want to debate?
Katie Hobbs needs to debate her.
But she won't spill any details on her radical, left-wing agenda.
I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to talk politics with anyone who I don't know.
Don't the voters of Arizona deserve to see that?
Is it your responsibility as a candidate who wants to run Arizona?
So what will a lake secession cost you? Seniors lose Social Security checks and Medicare benefits. 2 million Arizonans lose their health insurance. 6 military bases closed. The National Guard disbanded. Kari Lake's serious about secession, and that's seriously dangerous.
So coming out of the ads we just saw, he suggested too, Hank, that there's been renewed interest in the Blake Masters Kelly race in the last couple of weeks. I've seen that in terms of the ad spending, that Kelly was dramatically outspending Masters for the better part of the campaign. But recently, money has started to come back into Arizona from some outside groups in particular to try to level the playing field a bit in terms of frequency of ads. That's got to be a sign of confidence that national Republicans are having, that a race that they were almost ready to write off probably 2-3 months ago is now fully back in play.
I think it's remarkable. If you look at where the money's going, if money's flowing into Arizona for Blake Masters, people aren't going to put money into something if they don't think it's winnable. So the fact that Mark Kelly, who in the early prognosticators 6 months ago, no one really thought he was vulnerable. And now they think he might be vulnerable. Just that in and of itself tells you about the political environment that we're dealing with. And I think it's really remarkable, too, after the 2020 election, so much skepticism about the results of the 2020 election. They mentioned the audit that took place there, that we're even talking about the possibility of, Kari Lake and Blake Masters winning. Not that I didn't think that they couldn't win, but there's a disconnect once again between what the national media, the national pundits and prognosticators think is happening on the ground and what is actually happening on the ground. And that's what I find so fascinating.
The expression, winning cures all ills. Well, What Hank said basically was that if Kari Lake were to prevail, the idea about all the challenges that have been made, that maybe they all start to go away a bit, and the faith and trust in democracy and the election results on election night, maybe they get kind of a much-needed shot of approval all over again if they win. But if they do not win, the suggestion would be it gets maybe worse.
I think that's certainly possible. I really think it depends on what happens on election night, what the reporting is in terms of the election results. One thing that gave a lot of people doubts last time was, President Trump developed these leads in states like Pennsylvania, and then over time, over the next couple of days, those leads got dwindled away. And I understand, why that happens, or why the explanation why that happens. But I think that if that same phenomenon doesn't happen, I hope that people will have faith in the election. And I also think that it will be interesting to see, should Lake win, should Masters win, will the Democrats accept those results?
Right.
We know that Stacey never accepted the results when she lost in Georgia. So I'm hopeful that whoever wins and whoever loses, both parties accept the results of the election. That's how we get out of this.
It's also interesting when you asked Hank about immigration. As much as we try to nationalize every race in the country, there are local issues or regional issues that are paramount. And when Hank said that immigration is not necessarily a top 3 issue, it's probably a top 2 issue. I'm assuming the other is the economy. That says a lot. I think it was 2.5 years. I lived in Tucson, Arizona. Don't ask me about the details. It was a great time of my life, early, young, between campaigns. And I remember that the feeling of being very close to the border, then it was kind of a romantic idea. Nogales, Mexico was just, almost a stone's throw away, it felt, from Tucson. Now the border is a demarcation point.
In my view, this is one of the most underreported issues affecting some of these national races, especially in the state of Arizona. That's why I asked Hank that question. When I was in Phoenix just a few days ago, I saw some billboards and television ads that were hammering Mark Kelly on the issue of immigration. And my view is if Masters does win and beat Mark Kelly, immigration will be one of the major reasons, maybe not the only reason, but one of the major reasons that the Masters wins. And you're not really hearing in the national press level a lot of discussion about the impact that the immigration issue is going to have on some of these Senate races. And if Masters wins, and if the Republicans take control of the Senate by 1 vote, immigration will have a large reason for that happening.
Well, we have now covered 3 of what we think are the 4 target Senate races in the country. Of 1 to go. This is probably one of the most interesting we've covered so far. Heaven knows where it goes, except I do believe that in this state, the Republican candidate for governor, Kari Lake, if she prevails, is going to be a shooting star out there in the political galaxy, and one certainly to watch. Great being with you, as always. Justin, of course, who's with us from Miami today. Next up, before the midterms themselves, the state of Nevada. Make sure you don't miss these and future episodes by following us on Apple, Spotify, or any other podcast platform, or go to the YouTube channel where you can subscribe for free. From Ballard Studios, it's 13th and Park.